This is a distribution curve comparing the average American male body fat percentage, which sits around 27%, to the sub 10% standard you see on social media every day. Look at this massive mathematical gap between the two. That gap is so enormous that you are statistically more likely to become a millionaire than to walk around naturally with the physique of a fitness influencer. Chasing an impossible standard often leads to extreme methods that prioritize rapid change over sustainable biology, which is why 97% of these attempts fail to reach even moderate goals. When we see those odds, we usually blame a lack of willpower or discipline, but this failure rate is actually a predictable biological consequence of standard dieting advice. To survive those odds, we have to map out the exact chronological timeline of how a standard diet collapses and build a counterintuitive system to outsmart it.
On day 1 of a standard diet, most people are told to ease into a caloric deficit slowly, cut a few calories, see how it feels, and gradually get more aggressive over a few weeks. But this approach often has the opposite of the intended effect. At the start of a diet, you have the most fat to lose, your energy levels are highest, and your mental willpower is fresh. Implementing the most aggressive calorie deficit phase immediately takes advantage of your body and mind being best equipped to handle it. This graph tracks what happens next. The line dropping steadily shows your body fat decreasing over the first 4 weeks. But right around week 5, it intersects with this rapidly rising line. That spike represents intense hunger and cravings, a biological alarm triggered by your body registering the fat loss and trying to defend itself. Here is where standard diets collapse. People interpret that sudden, intense hunger as a personal failing. They break the diet, and as you can see on the timeline, the fat loss trajectory abruptly reverses and climbs right back up. What you actually need at that week 5 wall is a strategic adjustment to counter your impending starvation response. The intervention is simple: radically increase your protein intake. High protein serves a dual biological function. It forces your body to burn fat instead of cannibalizing your existing muscle tissue for energy, and it directly neutralizes those escalating hunger signals by keeping you full. Surviving that first month relies on using your early momentum to drive the fastest results, and then deploying protein to disarm your body's metabolic defense mechanisms before they derail you. But biology isn't the only trap. Monday through Friday, strict diets often rely on cutting out entire food groups like carbs or fats, which builds an enormous amount of psychological tension. By the time Saturday arrives, that cumulative restriction inevitably snaps. One social dinner turns into a weekend of overeating, followed by intense guilt, creating a cycle that mathematically erases all the progress you made during the week. The countermeasure is planned flexibility. Instead of total elimination, make minor adjustments, like 2 eggs instead of 3, or slightly smaller rice portions. Then schedule room for one enjoyable, controlled meal on the weekend to release that psychological pressure before it builds into a binge. When that weekend trap stalls their progress, most people panic. They try to force the scale down by adding grueling, exhausting cardio. The human body is highly adaptive. Burn extra calories on the treadmill, and it triggers a mechanism called cardio compensation. You subconsciously move less later in the day. You feel more lethargic, and your hunger increases, canceling out the very deficit you just sweated for. Instead of fighting your body with heavy cardio, use resistance training to signal that your muscle tissue is still required. Then use daily walking, increasing your steps from 4,000 to 8,000 a day to burn calories consistently without triggering that compensation effect. True sustainability comes from outsmarting behavioral triggers with planned flexibility and bypassing the body's fatigue response with low-impact movement. Brute force simply does not work long-term. This pie chart highlights a tiny 3% sliver, representing those who actually hit their target physique. But watch what happens next. Over 80% of that specific successful group will eventually regain the weight. A lighter body is a highly efficient machine. As you lose mass, your body requires significantly fewer calories just to exist. If you return to your baseline eating habits after reaching your goal, the amount of food that once created a deficit now creates an immediate caloric surplus. Your biology is actively trying to pull your weight back up to its original set point, exactly where you started.
The few people who stay lean long-term realize the interventions they use to lose the fat, eating high protein, daily brisk walking, and planned flexibility, cannot be abandoned. They must evolve into permanent habits. Maintaining a lean physique requires a permanent behavioral system that functions even when motivation disappears, rather than a temporary project with a finish line.